I am not going back to her. I can handle this myself. That was a Miranda, Verity repeated silently to herself as she and her sister worked diligently on the dress. Truth be told, she didn't remember much of the process. Only that it wasn't going very well, and the two had abandoned the project after about an hour of work. They promised to pick it up later, but that was half-hearted at best. As Sweetabelle retired to her room for a nap, Verity couldn't help but wonder if she was going crazy. She felt physically ill. Whatever was going on here was clearly out of her control, which in turn made her feel angry with herself. I can handle this! And yet it appeared that she was completely incapable of such a feat. Helplessness dutifully added itself to a cocktail of emotions. And yet, if she crawled back to that insufferable purple unicorn, she would just prove to her, much less to herself, that she wasn't competent enough to wield the magic that she'd been born with. She sat down in a nearby chair with a huff and tried to clear her head, standing up again almost instantly. She needed some tea. Tea was always good for calming the nerves. The white unicorn walked to the edge of the hallway, heading for the smallish kitchen directly adjacent to her workshop. She pulled the tea bags out from the nearby cupboard and levitated her favourite tea kettle from one cup to another. After filling the kettle with water, she set it to boil on the stove. She took one of the tea bags out of the container and tore it open. Her accompanying routine stopped for a moment as she looked at the tea bag still suspended in the air. She never usually thought about how she was going to use her magic from day to day. Yet here she was, doing something that any Earth Pony and any Pegasus would be able to give their left hoof to try, much less be able to do. Maybe I don't need to be the best. As the thought settled, she calmed down for what seemed like the first time in a very long while. Maybe it was the novelty of such a thought that soothed her. She had within her a gift. And maybe I forget that sometimes. The kettle let out a hiss. Hot steam letting Verity know that the water was ready. She levitated the kettle and poured a measured amount of boiling water into her cup. When she turned around to set the kettle aside, a gasp caught in her throat when she turned to put the tea bag in the cup. Previously scalding water had been turned to solid ice. Out of instinct and more shock than anything else, Rarity lashed out with her magic, sending the teacup flying across the room and into the wall with a sharp telekinetic discharge. The porcelain shattered, splashing still steaming water along that side of the room. Verity stood motionless for many minutes. Her breathing was erratic. The calm feeling she had so briefly savoured just a moment ago was but a fleeting memory. She stared at the remains of her favourite cup, desperately trying to convince herself that what she had seen was real. Yet across the floor the steam still rose from the water that she herself had poured. With grim realization, Verity knew what she had to do. She knew who she had to see, and it was a pony far more powerful than Twilight. It wasn't every day you got to see a monarch in person. Under normal circumstances, such a thing would be impossible on such short notice, but these were not normal circumstances. Upon her arrival at Canterlot's royal court an hour later, Verity had asked the gate guards for an audience with Luna. Maybe they recognized her as one of the bearers of the elements of harmony? Maybe Luna was more lenient with the visitors than Celestia. And whatever the case may have been, in under 15 minutes she was waiting for the God Queen in the royal library. Strangely, it was devoid of any other pony. The depository smelled faintly of dust and paper. The towering stacks of volumes around her were slightly intimidating. It had the air of a crypt. It was so quiet and still. Verity preferred the friendly atmosphere of Twilight's library. It was a little late to turn back now. In what seemed like no time at all, Luna had entered the library and shut the door behind her. Verity had expected to see guards outside the door before it closed, but there were none. The princess was wearing naught but her crown, but she was still an intimidating sight, even scaled down from Nightmare Moon as she was. She seemed even more daunting in the comparative darkness of the library than she ever did in Celestia's daylight. Verity swallowed, remembering the night she had helped redeem her. Maybe she could do the same for her. The Olicorn sat down next to Rarity quietly and fluffed her wings. You said it was urgent, she said in a neutral tone, inviting her to speak. Verity did so, recounting everything that had happened after she'd woken up from her spell-induced in the library. nightmare, including, somewhat to her embarrassment, her feelings of jealousy about Twilight. She had no idea what might be relevant, so she left nothing out. Luna listened quietly throughout her tale. At the end of the story, Luna sat for a moment considering her words. She levitated a pitcher of pure water and poured a small goblet, offering it to Rarity. Rarity took it gladly as Luna poured one for herself. "Let me ask something." "Yes, Princess? How do you think you got here so easily?" Rarity was confused by the question at first and about to respond in kind, but after thinking it over for a minute, she realized that her journey here had been rather uneventful. Actually, now that she was trying to recall it, it slipped away from her. Twilight would never have let you leave that house in the first place. She would have felt too guilty about her scroll and what it might have done to you. Your sister would have been far more illogical than she was. She would never have thought to bring you to a nurse. She would have been driven to help you herself. Rarity was still trying to absorb Luna's strange wording. Her scroll? Think about it. Twilight's most prized possessions are her books. All of her spells are in her books. She doesn't keep scrolls, she keeps books. When was the last time you saw her use a scroll for a spell? Rarity tried to remember a single time in their lessons. She couldn't. Was the scroll written in her hoofsmanship? Yes. She wrote that scroll herself. Does Twilight strike you as a competent enough magician to compose a scroll-long incantation by herself? Rarity hesitated, biting her lip. Don't be afraid to answer honestly. Remember your time in Canterlot and Twilight's lessons. Incantations are extensive and complicated affairs, only done by classically trained arcane scholars. They're not things to be left lying around on library tables. Rarity sat stoic, unsure of how to respond. Did Twilight write that spell herself? Probably not, Rarity said, caving to Luna's logic. Exactly. She was, in all probability, experimenting with an existing spell. Your fears about any deception on her part are unwarranted. You were never meant to see the scroll. Therefore, whatever she wrote is almost certainly not having its desired effect on you. Whatever that effect might have been, I cannot say for certain. Rarity had finally connected the dots, but almost wished she hadn't. Her heart jumped into her throat as her head whipped towards the princess. I'm still asleep? Luna looked her calmly in the eyes for the first time. It is a possibility. Rarity opened and shut her mouth several times, unable to think of anything to say. She looked around herself and realized that the library had shifted slightly from moments ago. The minor changes now painfully obvious before this new realization. Some of the stacks had been shuffled slightly, leaving some of the books as spine lettering changed. Though she couldn't remember what they originally said, she innately knew they were different. She gazed into her goblet. It was empty. Is it such a surprise? Rarity's head swam as the world around her seemed to distort with her hyperventilation. But Una looked up from her goblet. Her face did not belie any hint of emotion. Calm yourself now, Rarity, and think. I have given you no new information. Everything I have told you just now you already know. You have been able to see it. Accept the thought that everything you've experienced in the last day or so was all in your head. It is quite probable that you are simply occupying a new layer of the spell now, loosened from its grasp but still tethered. Your rebellion against the rogue magic in your system caused your ascension. There's nothing more going on here. Rarity could scarcely believe what she was hearing. Yet beneath her panic she realized Luna was making sense. She had been more lucid in the past 24 hours than she had been since she cast the rogue spell. Whatever lucidity accounted for in this realm, the more she considered Luna's words, the more she realized that the princess's conclusion was the only correct one. She turned back to the God Queen, trying to calm herself with more questions. So, if you're not Luna, who are you? You. Or, rather, your magic. Your subconscious is still mostly trapped beneath the layers of the rogue spell, despite the impressive damage you did to it. So I can wake up? No, not without my help. That's why I drew you to me.